She fell into the lake. The slave man who saved her sparked a storm no one expected. The morning that everything changed began like any other on the sprawling Whitford plantation, a place where the sun rose slowly over endless fields of cotton, touching the land with a golden light that hid more truths than it revealed. The cicadas hummed. The horses whinnied in their stalls. The whitewashed main house stood proudly on a hill, its tall columns glinting in the early light as though nothing dark had ever touched its walls. But inside those fields, inside those cabins, inside the bones of the place itself, something was always brewing, something no one dared speak of. Caleb knew this well enough. He was a tall, strong young man, black as the rich soil he worked, shoulders hardened by years of labor, hands rough from rope, river, reeds, and endless cotton stems. His mother used to say his eyes were too soft for the world he'd been born into, and maybe she was right. He still carried kindness like a fragile ember he refused to let burn out. That morning, he was walking toward the lake with a wooden bucket swinging at his side, heading to fill it before the heat climbed too high. The lake was quiet at dawn, a place where he could pretend, for just a moment, that the world was bigger than fences and overseers' shadows. The mistress reached the lake first. Evelyn Whitford, 23, pale-skinned as fresh cotton, with hair the color of wheat fields before harvest, stood near the water in a blue dress that shimmered in the early light. She wasn't supposed to be there alone. The master didn't like her wandering more than a few steps from the front porch, but her husband was away on business in Savannah, and Evelyn often took small freedoms when no one was watching. Caleb didn't disturb her. He never did. The rules didn't need to be spoken aloud. They were carved into his very existence. Keep distance. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't look too long. Don't ever be seen in the wrong place at the wrong time. He stayed on the narrow dirt path, lowering his gaze politely as he approached. Evelyn's voice broke the silence in that soft, careful way she had when speaking to anyone she knew her husband considered beneath her, even when she didn't feel that way herself. "Good morning, Caleb." He paused, bowed his head slightly. "Morning, ma'am. Fetching water for the kitchen?" "Yes, ma'am." A gentle breeze lifted the surface of the lake, sending ripples gliding across like silver threads. Evelyn stepped closer to the water, lifting her skirts just above her ankles. "That lake's colder than it looks," Caleb murmured without thinking. She looked back at him, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. He almost apologized for speaking out of turn, but she smiled faintly instead, a small, tired smile that held something unspoken. "Perhaps that's why I'm drawn to it," she said. "Cold things tend to be honest." He didn't know what she meant, but he didn't ask. She stepped onto the wooden dock, the planks creaking beneath her weight. Caleb knelt at the shoreline a few yards away, letting the bucket sink into the cool water. He kept his eyes low, focused on the ripples spreading around the wooden handle. Behind him, he heard the sudden crack of splintering wood. Then a gasp. Then nothing. Nothing except the violent splash that shattered the stillness of the morning. Caleb turned sharply. The dock had broken clean through. Evelyn's body disappeared beneath the lake's calm surface, swallowed instantly. For one split second, there was no movement, just silence, wide and heavy. Then panic struck him like lightning. "Ma'am!" He dropped the bucket. It rolled away, spilling water into the dirt. Caleb sprinted into the shallows and dove, arms cutting through the waves as he plunged into the cold. The lake closed around him, chilling his bones, stealing the breath from his chest. But he pushed deeper, reaching blindly beneath the surface. His hands brushed fabric, silk, tangled and heavy with water. He grabbed her waist, pulling her up, kicking hard toward the surface until air burst over them again. Evelyn coughed violently, gasping, her fingers clutching desperately at his shoulder. The weight of her soaked dress dragged them both. and for a terrifying moment he felt himself sinking with her. The lake pulling them back under like it refused to let them go. "Hold on," he said, breathless. He didn't know if she heard. He tightened his grip, fighting the current, forcing his legs to keep kicking, dragging her inch by inch toward the shore. Every stroke burned, every breath hurt, but he kept moving until his feet finally scraped against the muddy bottom. He carried her the rest of the way, lifting her out of the water as she coughed and shivered, her skin pale as moonlight. He laid her gently on the grass, kneeling beside her while she clutched at her chest, gasping for air. For a moment, they just stayed like that, the mistress trembling, the slave panting from exertion, the world spinning around them both. "Why you saved me," she whispered. He shook his head, chest heaving. "You fell. I just did what anybody would have done." She looked at him with wide, fearful eyes, not fear of him, but fear of the truth they both knew all too well. "Caleb, anyone might have helped, but only one person will be punished for it." Her voice cracked. He felt the truth of her words like a stone sinking deeper into his stomach. Behind them, far across the field, a figure moved. Someone on horseback. Caleb couldn't see who, but he knew the overseer rode the grounds at this hour. He stood quickly, scanning the plantation. The wind carried the distant sound of hooves, steadily approaching. Evelyn struggled to sit up, shivering violently. "Caleb," she whispered urgently, "if he sees us like this." Her voice faded as the sound of hooves grew louder, closer, inevitable. And in that moment, soaked, trembling, breathless, they both knew what happened next might destroy one of them. This was how the storm began. The sound of hooves grew heavier, pounding against the earth like a warning drum. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. Evelyn tried to stand, but her legs buckled beneath her. The lake water soaked through her dress, making the fabric cling to her skin, heavy and cold. Frosty morning wind bit against both of them. Caleb instinctively stepped in front of her, not touching, he wouldn't dare, but close enough to be a shield if the overseer appeared over the hill. "Ma'am, you gotta sit," he whispered urgently. "You ain't steady." "I'm fine," she tried, though her voice trembled. "Just cold." He glanced around. The nearest trees offered a thin patch of shade and a little cover from the main road. The hooves sounded closer, much closer. Whoever it was, they were riding hard. "Ma'am, please," Caleb said. "Let me get you behind those trees till we know who it is." Her blue eyes darted toward the approaching figure. Fear flashed there, raw, unmistakable. Not fear of injury, fear of scandal, fear of accusation. A white woman alone with a young black slave at the lake, soaked, gasping, shaken. That story could twist into anything someone wanted it to be. And on plantations, truth was the weakest currency. Evelyn leaned against him, not out of choice, but because her legs truly couldn't hold her. Caleb steadied her elbow lightly, guiding her toward the tree line. Every second mattered. Every heartbeat felt loud enough to betray them. The horse neared the lake. Caleb caught sight of the rider now, M.R. Briggs, the overseer, a tall, red-haired man with eyes sharp as broken glass. Briggs ruled the fields with a cruelty that even the master often ignored. He trusted his overseer far too much, especially with the punishments Caleb had learned to anticipate by the crack of leather alone. Caleb felt Evelyn sway again. He knelt quickly, lowering her behind a cluster of low branches. She gasped from the cold air biting through her drenched dress. "Stay quiet, ma'am," Caleb murmured. "I'll go out there. Make it look like I'm just filling water." "You can't," she whispered fiercely. "Your clothes are soaked. He'll know something happened." Caleb looked down at himself. Lake water dripped from his shirt and pants, pooling at his feet. He couldn't hide this. He couldn't lie his way out of it. Not with Briggs. The heavy footsteps of the horse slowed as Briggs approached the broken dock. Caleb's heart pounded in his ears. If Briggs found them both here. He didn't let himself finish the thought. Briggs' voice echoed over the lake. Who's out here? Someone been swimming without permission? Caleb stepped forward, leaving the brush behind. Morning, Mr. Briggs. Briggs narrowed his eyes. What are you doing soaked through like a river rat? Caleb swallowed hard. His throat felt thick. Bucket slipped, sir. Fell in trying to get it back. Briggs leaned forward in the saddle, studying him. Every drop of water on his clothes, every breath he took. You fall in? Briggs said slowly. Funny. I don't see no bucket out there. Caleb froze. Briggs turned his head toward the lake. The bucket lay half submerged by the shore, exactly where Caleb had first dropped it, but the wooden handle bobbed too neatly above the water. It wasn't far out enough to match the way Caleb had described falling in. Briggs noticed everything. Always had. I'll fetch it, Caleb said quickly, stepping toward it. But Briggs held up a hand. Don't move. The overseer's gaze swept the shoreline, the broken dock, the churned earth where Caleb had dragged Evelyn out, the footprints, 2 sets, not just one. Caleb's stomach twisted as Briggs slid off the horse. He walked slowly, boots sinking into damp soil, following the prints like a hunter tracking prey. Now ain't this interesting, Briggs muttered. Caleb's mouth went dry. Briggs crouched near the second set of footprints, much smaller, the delicate outline unmistakably belonging to the mistress. He pressed 2 fingers into the heel print. Someone been standing here, he said. A lady by the look of it, and mighty close to where you stand now. Caleb said nothing. Anything he said could be used against him. Briggs looked up with a thin smile. Where's Miss Evelyn? Caleb's jaw clenched. He didn't answer. Briggs straightened. You were talking to her earlier. I saw her walking this way. I ain't stupid. Caleb's breath stilled. A dry twig snapped behind the trees where Evelyn hid. Briggs' eyes flickered sharply toward the sound. Caleb's pulse hammered. Before Briggs could take a step, Caleb spoke quickly, boldly, recklessly. Miss Evelyn ain't here. Briggs stared him down, hard. Then where is she? Caleb lowered his gaze. I don't know, sir. Briggs walked straight toward the trees. Caleb stepped in front of him. Briggs stopped. Move, he said flatly. If you go in there, Caleb said quietly, you'll scare the foxes. They sleep there. They'll run, sir. They'll tear across your boots. Briggs raised a brow. You think I care about foxes? Caleb didn't back down. Master does. Says they keep the mice out of the smokehouse. A thin thread of truth. Enough to sound believable. Briggs stared at him, long, cold, calculating. Caleb felt the weight of it push against him like a physical force. A man like Briggs was dangerous, not only because of what he did, but because of what he imagined. And right now, he was imagining something. Caleb's pulse thudded painfully. Behind him, Evelyn stayed utterly still, clutching a trembling hand over her own mouth. Finally, Briggs stepped back. Fine, he said, but you best explain them footprints. All of them. Caleb forced himself to breathe evenly. Miss Evelyn likes to walk in the mornings. Saw her pass by, that's all. Briggs sniffed the air, actually sniffed it, his eyes flicking toward the faint scent of lavender water that Evelyn always wore. He didn't believe the lie. Caleb could see it, feel it, but he also knew Briggs wouldn't risk accusing the mistress without proof. Not yet. Briggs mounted his horse again. You're hiding something. I'll find out what. He tugged the reins sharply. And when I do, boy, you'll regret it. Caleb kept his expression still, hollow. Briggs turned and rode off, kicking dust into the air. The moment the horse disappeared over the ridge, Caleb rushed back to the brush. Evelyn slumped forward, catching herself on a branch. Caleb. Her voice shook. If he had found me. I know, ma'am, he said softly. You lied for me. I had to. Her eyes lifted to his, wide, shaken, grateful in a way she didn't know how to express. You saved my life, she whispered. Twice now. Caleb didn't answer, because somewhere in the distance, Deeper inside the plantation, a bell began to ring. The morning call. Work was starting. And the storm that Briggs promised, the storm he would bring with his suspicions, was just beginning to gather. Caleb helped Evelyn steady herself as they crept back toward the edge of the lake, careful to keep low and unseen. Her dress clung to her in wet folds, her hair plastered to her face, but she made no complaint. Every step she took seemed to weigh on her, each one a reminder of how close the overseer had come. Caleb's own clothes dripped water, the cold settling into his bones, but he ignored it. There was more at stake now than his comfort. Once they reached the small grove of trees a little farther from the lake, Evelyn sank onto a fallen log, shivering violently. Caleb knelt beside her, wrapping his arms around his chest, trying to think, trying to plan what would come next. You did more than save me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If Briggs had caught me out there, you could have been blamed." Her blue eyes searched his, wide and urgent. "I don't know what I'd do if anything happened to you." Caleb shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I just did what I had to. Nobody asked for this. Nobody asked for me to be here." His voice cracked slightly, though he tried to cover it. "But I'm still here." A silence fell between them. Not peaceful, not comfortable, just tense, like the air itself was holding its breath. "I shouldn't have come," Evelyn murmured. "I was reckless. My father, my husband, they would." Her hands trembled as she clutched her wet skirt. "You put yourself at risk for me. I don't know how to thank you." Caleb met her gaze. "Don't thank me, ma'am. You can't. I ain't got no choice sometimes. Only what I do with the choices I got." Evelyn swallowed hard, nodding slowly. I understand more than I ever did of what you endure every day, and I never saw it before." Caleb exhaled, trying to steady his shaking hands. "Most folks don't want to." For a long moment, neither spoke, only the wind rustling the trees, the distant calls of birds. Then, from the lake's direction, the sound of splintering wood again. This time not the dock, but a small boathouse along the far edge. Caleb tensed. Briggs might still be searching, moving slowly, checking every corner, following his suspicions. The morning's close call had not ended. It had only begun. "You need to get back," Caleb said quietly. "You can't stay here. Not like this." "He'll come back." Evelyn shook her head. "I can't. My father, he's gone to Savannah. No one is here to." Her words faltered. "No one is here to make sure I'm safe if I go back." Caleb's eyes narrowed. He realized she meant exactly what he had feared. Not just Briggs. Not just the broken dock, the lake, the chance of drowning, but the plantation itself, the rules, the watchful eyes. Any misstep could have grave consequences. Her or him, anyone near them. "I can hide you for now," Caleb said, voice low. "In the barn. There's a loft I can get you into. Nobody goes up there. Only me." Her lips pressed together. You would do that?" He nodded, grim. "I would. But it ain't safe for long. Someone will come looking, and when they do, I don't know what'll happen." She swallowed. I trust you." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Not love, not longing, just trust. And trust was rare. Trust was dangerous. Trust could get a person killed on this land. A sudden rustle in the underbrush jolted them both. Caleb froze. Evelyn gasped softly. They exchanged a glance, hearts hammering. It was a white dog, bounding toward them, tail wagging, oblivious to the tension. Caleb let out a slow breath. The danger had not yet passed, but for now, it was only nature. "You have to move," he urged again, helping her to her feet. "Before someone comes back." She nodded, shivering, leaning on him as they began moving silently toward the barn at the edge of the fields. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound magnified, and every step brought them closer to a confrontation neither of them could predict. By the time they reached the barn, Caleb had made a decision. He would hide her there for the day if he had to, and take the consequences later. But he knew something fundamental had shifted. Evelyn Whitford had seen him, not just as a slave, not just as a boy who did what he was told, but as someone who had courage, someone capable of action, someone human. And he, for the first time, realized he had seen her as more than the distant, untouchable mistress. The moment of trust had passed. Now came the moment of tension. They were trapped together in a secret only they shared, and the stakes were growing by the hour. Footsteps on the dirt path outside, closer, deliberate. Caleb's hand instinctively went to the loft ladder. Evelyn's eyes widened. He looked at her, voice tight. No! She climbed swiftly, silently, the soaked fabric of her dress making it harder. Caleb followed, making sure the ladder didn't creak too loudly. They reached the loft, dimly lit by a small window high above the barn doors. Caleb shut it carefully, leaving only a narrow crack for light. They sat together in the shadows, catching their breath, hearts hammering. Outside, the plantation moved with its usual rhythm, except for the overseer, still searching, still suspicious, and still growing closer to discovering the truth. Caleb realized the danger had grown far beyond the lake. It had become something more personal, more urgent, and somewhere deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning of a storm that neither of them could control. Evelyn pressed her hands to her knees, trembling. Caleb, if they find out I was hiding here, if they think you helped me, he put a hand over his own chest. I know, and I'll deal with it. I'll do what I have to. But you stay quiet. Don't move. Don't breathe too loud. Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, Caleb allowed himself to notice the vulnerability, the humanity, the fear, not a mistress, not a taskmaster, not a symbol, but a person who could be hurt just as he could. The barn settled around them, the afternoon stretching, shadows deepening, the tension coiling tighter with each passing moment. Outside, the storm was gathering, both literal and metaphorical, and when it broke, nothing on the plantation would remain the same. The afternoon stretched on like a taut rope ready to snap. Caleb and Evelyn stayed huddled in the loft, the faint light from the small window painting the space in pale, trembling lines. Every sound, the rustle of hay, the distant clatter of tools, the occasional lowing of cattle, made their hearts leap. Outside, the plantation carried on as if nothing had happened, but both of them knew differently. One misstep, one careless glance, and everything could unravel. Caleb kept glancing at the loft ladder, listening. Time moved slowly, measured in the creak of wood and the whisper of wind through broken shutters. Each second stretched longer than the last. He was beginning to feel the weight of his decision. What he had done to save her, what he was still doing, carried consequences he could already feel pressing in from all sides. Down below, footsteps approached the barn. Not slow and careful like Briggs before, but purposeful and with authority. Caleb's stomach sank. It was the master's eldest son, Thomas Whitford, returning unexpectedly from errands. Caleb's mind raced. He knew Thomas barely tolerated him, but if Thomas saw Evelyn here, or worse, saw Caleb helping her, there would be trouble beyond anything Caleb could imagine. Evelyn clutched her knees, shivering not only from the chill, but from fear. Caleb, what do we do? He put a finger to his lips. Quiet. Just stay where you are. Don't move. Don't breathe too loud. I'll handle it. The barn doors swung open with a sharp creak, and Thomas's voice called out. I know someone's here. I saw footprints by the lake. Don't think you can hide from me, boy. Caleb's jaw tightened. Yes, sir, he said calmly, hiding the tremor in his voice. He slipped to the edge of the ladder, just enough to remain unseen, and called down in a steady tone. I'm here, sir. No one else. Thomas's boots hit the dirt floor with heavy thuds. I know a lady was out by the lake. If anyone harmed her, or let her get hurt, they'll pay. Caleb held his breath. Every word was a gamble. He knew Thomas's temper, his quick judgments. If Thomas came up here, all their safety would vanish. Suddenly, A shout came from the main house. Evelyn's wet footprints had already spread across the front yard. Someone else had seen her. The cook, maybe, or another servant. The voice was loud, panicked. "Miss Evelyn, are you all right?" Thomas froze, confusion flickering across his face. Caleb seized the moment. He stepped out from the ladder's shadow, head bowed respectfully. "Sir, she's safe. She's in the loft. I brought her up here from the lake. She, she fell in." Thomas's face went pale with shock. He opened his mouth to yell, then closed it. For the first time, he hesitated. He looked up at the loft, the sunlight catching in the window just enough to see the pale, shivering figure of his sister. "Caleb, you," he said finally, voice tight. "You saved her?" Caleb simply nodded. "Yes, sir. I did what I had to. She's safe, and I've kept her out of harm's way." Thomas's fists clenched at his sides. Anger flared, but it was tempered by relief, and perhaps by the realization that Caleb had acted not out of defiance, but out of courage and necessity. You could have been punished for this," Thomas said, more to himself than to Caleb. "You could have been whipped, sold. Worse." Caleb kept his expression calm. "Yes, sir. I know." The tension in the barn did not break, though. Thomas's gaze lingered on Caleb, a mixture of fear, respect, and disbelief. Finally, he turned to Evelyn. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though her body trembled. "I'm all right now," she said softly. Thomas's voice dropped. "I'll tell Father you're safe. But Caleb, you need to be careful. You did right. But the plantation, it doesn't forgive mistakes lightly. If anyone else finds out, Briggs or my father, you'll pay the price." Caleb bowed his head. "Yes, sir. I understand." Thomas left then, heavy boots fading across the barnyard. Silence settled again, but it was not the calm of peace. It was the stillness of a storm passing overhead, leaving tension and anticipation in its wake. Evelyn let out a long breath. You risked everything. You could have been punished. Maybe worse." Caleb shook his head. "I had to. Someone had to make sure you didn't drown." His voice softened. I don't want anyone else to get hurt. Least of all you." Her gaze held his, a mix of gratitude, fear, and a dawning understanding. I see you now, Caleb. I see the risks you take. Every day, and the strength it takes. The courage." He looked away, focusing on the rough boards of the loft. "I do what I can. That's all I can do." The consequence of his actions settled over him like a heavy cloak. He had saved her life, yes, but he had also exposed himself. Every day on the plantation, there were whispers, eyes watching, rumors that could ruin a life. And now, he had done something bold, so bold that no one could ignore it. He realized, bitterly, that saving her had changed more than her perspective of him. It had changed the game entirely. Every step forward now was dangerous. Every glance, every action, every decision, he would have to weigh it carefully for himself and for Evelyn. And he knew, deep in his chest, that the storm Thomas had hinted at was only the beginning. Briggs would ask questions. Others would notice her wet clothes, her sudden absence. And soon, the weight of suspicion would descend, heavier and harsher than any river current. For now, Caleb and Evelyn remained in the loft, trapped between fear and relief, their hearts still racing. They had survived the lake, but survival had consequences. Consequences that would ripple through the plantation, testing every bond, every secret, every ounce of courage they had. The evening sky had turned a bruised purple, the sun sinking low behind the fields, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the plantation. Caleb sat in the loft, listening to the distant sounds of the workers finishing their day, the low murmur of horses, and the occasional shout of an overseer. Every noise made his chest tighten. Every passing moment reminded him that time was running out. Evelyn sat beside him, wrapped in a thin blanket Caleb had pulled from the loft, her body still trembling from the cold and the adrenaline that had yet to fade. Her fingers clutched at the rough wool, her blue eyes fixed on the far horizon. as though she could see the danger before it reached them. "Caleb," she whispered, her voice almost breaking. "They're going to find out. Briggs, Thomas, someone. And when they do—" "I know," Caleb said quietly. "I know. That's why we need a plan. And we don't have much time." They spoke in hushed tones, plotting. The problem wasn't just hiding her for the night. It was the inevitable discovery. Briggs had already seen enough to suspect, and Thomas's unusual hesitation only meant he'd be scrutinizing Caleb more closely than ever. They needed a decisive action to prevent disaster, not just avoidance. Then a shadow moved across the barnyard. A torch flickered in the distance. Caleb's heart skipped a beat. Briggs! He was coming back, and this time he wouldn't leave without answers. "We can't stay here," Caleb said, urgency cutting through the cold dread. "If he finds you in the loft, I can't stop him. I can't risk it." Evelyn's eyes widened. "What? What do we do?" "There's nowhere to run. Not safely." Caleb's jaw tightened. He had already considered it. The only option left required courage, precision, and absolute faith in each other. "We leave." "No." "You follow my lead, and whatever happens, stay close." She nodded, her fear sharp, but tempered with trust. She had seen Caleb act decisively, without hesitation, and for the first time, she understood that trust could sometimes mean survival. He helped her down the ladder silently, then moved to the barn doors, testing the latch. Outside, the torchlight danced over the fields. Briggs was coming steadily, calling Caleb's name, voice hard and unforgiving. Caleb swallowed. "Ready?" he whispered. "Yes," she replied, her voice firm, though trembling. Caleb slipped out first, moving low and fast toward the shadow of a nearby grove that led to the back of the plantation. Evelyn followed, every step careful, silent, guided by his presence. The wind carried the smell of hay, wet earth, and the lingering chill of the lake. Suddenly, a shout rang out. Briggs had spotted movement. Horses whinnied. The chase began. Caleb didn't falter. He grabbed Evelyn's hand, pulling her through the underbrush, around the corners of the barn, across a hidden ditch that only he knew. Every second counted. Every step could be the difference between freedom and punishment. They reached a small, forgotten storage shed at the edge of the property, a place few remembered existed. Caleb opened the door quietly and helped Evelyn inside. She sank against the wall, shivering, but her eyes glimmered with a fierce determination he hadn't seen before. "They'll come for me," she said, voice barely audible. "They won't just let this go." Caleb's hands rested on his knees. "Maybe not, but they won't find you here. Not tonight. And if they do, I'll do what I have to. You trust me, right?" Her gaze met his. "I do. I have to." Briggs' voice rang nearer now, sharp and angry, calling Caleb's name, cursing, threatening. Caleb knew the moment had arrived, the moment when action was the only choice, not hiding. He moved to the shed's side, peeking through a narrow crack. The overseer was scanning the grounds, eyes sharp, boots kicking up dust, voice growing louder. Caleb took a deep breath. He knew what he had to do. A sudden movement, a branch snapped underfoot. Briggs spun toward it. Caleb seized the moment, stepping from the shadows, shouting loudly and drawing Briggs' attention. "Over here!" he called, loud enough to echo. Briggs turned, eyes blazing. Caleb ran, drawing him toward a section of the field where the uneven earth and hidden ditches would slow the horse and throw off pursuit. Briggs cursed and gave chase, not realizing the ground was rigged by Caleb's careful knowledge of the terrain. Meanwhile, Evelyn stayed hidden, heart pounding, watching Caleb take the risk. Every step he took for her safety, every second he diverted the overseer, weighed on her like a physical presence. And yet, she had never felt more alive, more aware of courage and sacrifice. Caleb led Briggs into the trap he had prepared, a narrow ditch concealed by overgrown reeds. The horse stumbled, Briggs barely regaining balance, and Caleb ducked behind a tree, breathing heavily, watching. Briggs cursed, furious and off guard. "Run!" Caleb shouted to Evelyn. She didn't hesitate. She scrambled from the shed, moving fast, low, guided by his voice and his knowledge of the terrain. They made it through the back fields, past hidden paths only Caleb knew, finally reaching the edge of the woods beyond the plantation. They paused there, hidden in the shadows, lungs burning, hearts hammering. The distant shouts of Briggs had faded, replaced by silence that was almost unbearable. Evelyn finally exhaled, voice trembling. You risked everything. For me. Caleb shook his head. Not just for you. For both of us. For what's right. She looked at him, a mix of fear, gratitude, and a growing understanding reflected in her pale blue eyes. I. I'll never forget this. I'll make it right somehow. He only nodded, watching the distant shadows of the plantation. The moment of truth had passed, but the consequences would follow them, stretching far beyond the night, beyond the lake, beyond even their understanding. They had acted with courage, yes, but the storm, anger, suspicion, repercussions, was far from over. Caleb and Evelyn had survived the immediate danger, but now, every choice, every step, every secret would define what came next. The first rays of dawn stretched across the horizon, painting the plantation in pale gold and soft lavender. The fields, once threatening in shadow, now seemed almost peaceful, though Caleb knew better. Nothing about the Whitford plantation was ever truly calm, not after yesterday, not after the lake, not after the night that tested courage and loyalty in ways few could understand. Evelyn sat beneath the edge of the trees, wrapped in the blanket Caleb had given her, still shivering but steadying with each deep breath. Her dress had dried slightly in the morning breeze, though it hung in heavy folds, reminding her of the night's peril. She glanced toward the plantation, toward the barn, toward the world she had known her entire life. She had always lived with boundaries, rules, and the quiet oppression of expectations. But now, she saw beyond them. She had witnessed courage, loyalty, and a truth she could no longer ignore. Caleb stood a few steps away, keeping his back to the rising sun, his mind alert to any movement from the overseers or the workers who might have noticed his absence. He felt the weight of the night settle into his shoulders. They had survived, but survival was only the beginning. Consequences lingered like smoke in the air, visible but impossible to grasp fully. You saved me, Evelyn said softly. I don't know how I can ever repay you. Caleb shook his head. No need, ma'am. I done what I had to. That's all there is to it. She studied him for a long moment, the depth of her gaze unflinching. No, it's more than that. You. You risked everything. Your life. For someone else. I. I never realized what that meant, what it takes, what you take every day. He looked away, jaw tight, hands clenched at his sides. You don't need to know. You just live your life. Do right by what you can. That's all I ask. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the cool morning breeze moving through the trees, the distant sound of horses and men beginning their day. Caleb realized that in the span of a single night, the world had shifted. Nothing would ever be as simple as it once was. Evelyn had seen him, truly seen him, not a servant, not a shadow, but a human being who could act, who could think, who could fight when the moment demanded it. You've changed how I see this place, she admitted quietly. Everything. The rules, the fear, the way people are forced to live. Caleb didn't answer. He only nodded slowly. That was enough acknowledgement. She understood, and for now, that understanding was all that mattered. The distant clatter of footsteps warned them it was time to move. The plantation was waking, routines beginning, questions forming. They would have to return, cautiously, quietly, with every step measured. But the bond formed in the shadow of danger could not be erased. As they made their way back toward the edge of the fields, Caleb glanced at Evelyn. You'll have to be careful, for both our sakes. Don't let anyone know the truth of last night. Not Briggs, not Thomas, not your father. She nodded, the determination in her eyes steady now. I'll be careful. but I'll remember. Always. They returned separately from the paths most traveled, Caleb blending into the morning work routine, Evelyn slipping quietly back into the main house. No one questioned them. No one saw. But the echoes of the night remained, unseen but felt in the spaces between words, in the way shadows lingered. By midday, life seemed to resume its ordinary rhythm, but both Caleb and Evelyn knew it was forever changed. Fear had sharpened their senses, danger had cemented trust, and the night had proven that courage often came in quiet, unheralded acts. Later, when Evelyn stood by her window, looking out over the lake, she whispered softly to herself, as if the breeze could carry her words to him. Some truths are too heavy to carry alone. Some debts are impossible to repay. But courage cannot be unseen. Caleb, in the fields, bent low over the cotton plants, feeling the sun on his back and the weight of yesterday in his bones, allowed himself a small, quiet exhale. He had acted as he must, saved a life, faced danger, and survived. He knew the consequences were far from over, but he also knew he had done right. That was enough. For now. The plantation continued to hum with life, the cicadas singing, the horses stamping, the overseers shouting. Yet amidst it all, two lives had intersected in a way that would not be forgotten. Trust had been forged in the shadow of peril. Courage had been proven, and the storm, though not fully past, had left a mark deeper than any fear could erase. And in that quiet reflection, Caleb realized the truth he had always known but seldom felt allowed to embrace. Sometimes survival is not just about living, it's about standing, even when the world tells you to kneel. Evelyn would remember. Caleb would endure. And the lake, the barn, the shadows of the plantation, they would all carry the story of what courage, trust, and humanity could achieve, even in a place designed to crush it. The storm had passed, but its lessons lingered, powerful and indelible, in the hearts of those who dared to act.